Ooh, hey, we got Jupiter in the fourth house. This comes with Jupiter, the planet of growth, opportunities, planet of abundance, luck, that kind of thing. And then the fourth house. What's the fourth house? The fourth house is the house of private life, home life, childhood, connected to the mother specifically. Because it's Cancer rules the fourth house, right? You know, in this placement, you might have like great relationship with your family, like great. You love being around them, you like doing things for them. You like growing for the sake of, expanding your family, you know, making your family bigger. Your family might have ties to the community and they help out with shit sometimes. It depends on the sign and, in this house, right? So we got Aries, Jupiter in the fourth house. So Aries, Jupiter in the fourth house. This person is a little more energetic and aggressive about how they want to do things. Um, there might be challenges between um, parents when they're younger, right? So then when they get out on their own, they're able to finally like seek those opportunities they couldn't seek when they were younger, right? Either probably just because they were like, children and their parents didn't want them to do that shit. No, no, no. Mother was always like, you shouldn't do that. You could get hurt or whatever. You could, all kinds of shit, right? Daddy could have been like that. Mother wasn't there. But, the fourth house has to do with the mother, right? And whoever was like the more nurturing one in your family. So she was the one telling you shit like that. So like calm you the fuck down. But then when you get older and you're an adult, you don't hate your mother or parents, but you're just going out, experiencing life, the way you want to, with energy and, vibrance and all that shit, right? Anything you wanted to like explore or try to, do, you can now do and have that confidence, you learn about yourself through that. Maybe you weren't supposed to do shit like that and your parents were right. But sometimes it's not like that and it was actually you. More times than not, it was actually you were right. And your parents were probably fucking wrong and they were just tying you down. More times than not. Now, the next sign, and that sign's also very lucky because like the more they do stuff, the more wisdom they gain, and the more wisdom you gain, and better things flow, and you see more. You start to see the more positive outcomes coming your way. Now with Taurus, Jupiter in the fourth house, this person might have needed nudged a little bit to go and do things more. They were like family oriented and shit, right? They were a cornerstone to their family. Made themselves that. They made themselves dependable. They made themselves whatever, right? And then you could be like any sign with this, right? Um, so like finding opportunities weren't so on your agenda. More so, hold down. Be the best and reliable person I can be for mom, for dad. For the family unit, right? That kind of thing. And then when it transferred into adult life, you're kind of doing similarly. Um, Not that you don't try to seize opportunities and other things, right? So the fourth house or the Jupiter energy, right? Um, you still see opportunities, right? So you seek those opportunities that help you gain stability in life. So you're trying to look for, a good job so you can, handle your money, put your finances in order, and that takes like precedence to not necessarily other things like, you know, um, finding people and stuff, but it does because you have to find the right people to make more money. You're more money sensible and things like that, and that was instilled in you from a younger age. When they put those restrictions on you, you weren't really upset. You might have been a little bit, but ultimately you were like, this is going to help me out later in life. later in life comes around, you're like, hey, I'm trying to look for this job. I'm trying to um, do this kind of thing. When you stick to it, you stay consistent, you stack your bread, and basically you have that kind of money luck that comes your way. And it's because of the way you were raised by your mother. You know, she did get on you about sometimes, right? But it was to keep you on the right kind of path when it comes to making that money, right? You don't want to lose yourself. You don't want to not have anything. You want to find the right people to talk to, find the right people to get mentorships from, and shit like that, right? And a loving household comes through you because Taurus energy is like that, right? But anyways, Gemini in the fourth house, Gemini Jupiter in the fourth house, right? Gemini Jupiter in the fourth house. This placement right here, Gemini Jupiter. These people, right, like to talk to people, like to um talk to their family members. They let them know what the fuck's going on, right? So it's in the fourth house. They're talking to mom, asking mom, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that, kind of running it by them too, because they understand their mother has some kind of, say in what goes on in their life, they, put importance on that still, even though they, live on their own or whatever, right? Because they had that kind of, talking to, maybe, shouldn't hang out with these people, maybe you can hang out with those people, but, play your cards right, what you know, you can probably, convince them, because you're a person who, likes to be knowledgeable on things before they go and just do something. So you're not just going to do something necessarily, you're going to do some research. You're going to, make sure you know everything you need to know about any kind of subject or whatever. And then you're going to find people to talk to about that. And, so you have great conversation, have that kind of, rapport with them. And then, great things can happen. That's where the, abundance comes in, right? Because you know how to communicate with people. And it was locked in because you always had that good communication with your mother, right? And she made sure you were, good that way. And that became a blessing later on in life. Because now when you're an adult, you're talking to people, you're talking to people at your job, you're talking to people outside your job. You have, decent relationships outside of work. You know, you ain't afraid to approach other people and give your thoughts on the matter. That type of deal. So the next sign is Cancer. Cancer, Jupiter in the fourth house. Now this is a great placement because Cancer is exalted in Jupiter. That means great wisdom comes from that, right? So you really, really held on to what your mother told you, right? And it might have been even hard to move on from that, but ultimately you did. Moved out of the house and other things, right? And you use what your mother taught you, and you're basically, and not for the guys necessarily, but you took certain things that that nurturing, caring kind of aura, and you took it into your life, right? And you started finding people, and finding people that were of interest to you, and you felt they might be in a similar situation, or you just felt like you could talk to these people. You don't just necessarily talk to people, and you could talk to anybody, but you find those people who are for this and those people are for that. Like you have people you like to talk to, you have people you really bond with, and they become your close friends. You have your um, workplace people, business relationships, and you always try to be somebody who's you know puts their all into that kind of thing. You know, make sure they understand who you are and other things, right? You know, emotions run high with this placement, right? In early childhood, childhood in general, you had that relationship with your mother. It was really tight. Might not have been good with your daddy, but your mom, you were definitely tight with. And you use any kind of lessons she taught you to move forward and you know don't try to associate with people who get you into bad shit, any kind of bad things. Um, you know, if you find yourself doing that, still you still try to navigate things you ask yourself shit like, what would she do? What would she do in this situation? What the fuck would she do in this situation? And if you're a guy, you don't do that. How is this gonna like basically, honor my mother? How is this gonna like make her look good? Is this gonna like hurt me ultimately and make me look bad, and I'm gonna do her no good? Or am I gonna like do right by my mom and how she raised me, and I'm gonna make myself successful? I'm gonna find those people. I'm gonna find somebody who's really good with like financial stability, and make sure I'm like their best friend, you know, and like make sure they understand too, right? That yeah, I don't know all that shit like that or whatever, but I'm here to like listen and help, and I really appreciate you, that kind of thing. And you're just there as like a like really supportive friend, and willing to grow with them, for real. Your mom probably told you shit like, human lives are like not something that you should just like dismiss. Everybody comes from something, and these kind of words were like, driven into you, and like you really hit home when you heard that kind of stuff, and you take note of people who are like that. These are the people you more so learn from more, and then you try to teach other people who ain't like that how to maybe consider other people's emotional state more when they do things, because that can go a long way in your relationships and growth as a person, right? So the next sign is Leo Jupiter in the fourth house. So Leo Jupiter in the fourth house, you got that Leo energy. So there's probably some type of conflict in your house again, right? That probably came from I know best, and this and that, and I you got a lot of praise though too. See, that sense of praise, like, oh, my son, my daughter did this today, so like you got that from them, but then that made you also come to be arrogant to some degree. But then your mom was there to be like, maybe you shouldn't do that all the time, and that kind of conflict arose. But you left the house and you started to still be successful, because guess what, your mom made sure your friends you could come over and shit like that, and you could have your little powwow with your friends and shit, and you could do that, and it would be all right, and it would be all cool, and your friends loved you and shit, like, oh my god, when I'm with you, I feel like we're having the best time ever, that kind of thing. And like that just went into adult life, and you're making friends at work, or maybe you're not making friends but great acquaintances, that type of thing. You have the you take that initiative, you have that confidence in yourself to like not second guess and just be like, I know people enough because I've had so many friends around growing up, and that's a great thing to have, earlier on. Your mother might have been, like, don't be arrogant, don't make it all about you type shit. You can also, listen to, what your friends have to say. When you did that, great things happened for you and them, and they still liked you for, whatever you wanted to like get accomplished, whatever you were trying to, grow with, trying to, start a business, you're trying to start anything, just be in a friend group and, hang out with people, you know, and be the life of the party, right? And you can be any sign with displacement, but that is you. And you probably had some conflicts with your mother, though, with the whole, dynamic of, I know best, and I know what I like, and other things, and you shouldn't have did that to me, and another thing held me back so much. I like to hang out with my friends. I don't want to be around you all the time. Type shit. And it ain't that you necessarily hate your mom. You just understand that one day you gotta do your own thing, and when you want to do your own thing, you're like, hey, I'm doing my own thing over here. You know, I'm loud enough about it. You're gonna find out that what I'm doing. You'll know I'm all right. Type shit. That kind of thing. But the next sign is Virgo. Virgo, Jupiter in the fourth house. So Virgo, Jupiter in the fourth house. What does this mean? Your blessings came from the strict parenting, but like, you know, It did. So basically, you learned how to like be more structured, pay attention to details, never, um, run away from refinement. If you have to like improve here and there, that's fine, but like have a routine that's basically, you stick to. When you have to like improve and get critiques from people, take that, and people, and you're a smart enough person to know, like, which people to take these critiques from. You might have a little bit of a like restrictive, personality, only deal in this kind of thing with these people. You still might have fun, but even then you like make sure you only take it so far. And it's like by, your principles and by the, virtues and standards you follow, right? All that stuff, right? And it was because you had a strong, parent, strong household. Your mother was there to like reinforce that too, and you were like, make sure you go to work, make sure you like, do the best that you do, like best, don't let other stupid people or anybody, get in the way. you know you make sure you learn that shit, you make sure you hone your skills in that area, and you will be like, you know you'll be successful in your fucking, business or whatever you try to do in life, whatever job you have and shit like that. And it just took with it to the workplace, to your career, to, you know when you do have your fun time, you're making sure you don't have too much fun and shit like that. So like, you're a person, right? You try to be that person who people can look at and be like, this is who I should like model myself out after. If I'm trying to like really, be on my shit and really, you know, not really go partying and having fun so much, but you find like the fun in being that guy or that girl who does shit like that. I still have fun, but I make sure I like limit myself here and there. I make sure I check my friends. I like friends who check me and make sure that, I'm not too, you know, picky about shit, nitpicking about shit, you know. And that's Jupiter, right? So you want to grow because, and you say shit like, by all means, if I didn't like see something right, or um, whatever you need to get off your chest, but this is what I saw, that kind of thing. And you have great communication skills with people, and that helps you get through life. You always make sure you know what you're talking about. You can even critique people, when they need critique, take critique criticism for other people, and that's like your blessing that you get. Now, um, Libra, Jupiter in the fourth house, this person had that sense of community. You know, you like to like have friends over and shit too, right? But you're, cool. You like to know about people. Your parents might have been like, hey, I know you're thinking about that, but don't don't think about that kind of thing yet. You're too young. They would like kind of like brush shit aside. You cannot go over there and talk to that man. You're still like a little boy, little girl. Now, as you grew up, though, they would like then encourage you to do shit like that. Okay, you want to see what that person has to say? Go, come or tell him. Ask him what you want to ask him, but then come back to me right afterwards, and you would like do that, and you would still be a part of the family unit, and you talk on behalf of like even your parents at times. You wouldn't shy away from like even doing some shit like that. Like you wouldn't, you'd like be like, if you found out that your parents were like being done wrong, you'd be like, no, I don't, I don't even fucking, agree with that. We gotta figure this shit out. And you're doing things like that. You're talking to anybody you can to help your parents' situation now, especially if it's moms and shit, right? Because this is the fourth house. You like, your daddy can probably handle himself if you had the dad. Everybody's situation is different. But your mama, you're like, yeah, man. I'll make sure if she needed anything, I would, make sure I knew somebody or find somebody who could, do something. You know, and then people in the area just know you to be a good person like that. You like to, you know what's on other people's mind for the sake of, the safety of your family and yourself. I don't want somebody in my community, right, who's like not all right up here, not mentally sane or whatever, that could cause problems and shit. You like to nip that and be like, hey man, are you this or that or da, 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 and just ask a couple questions. You're not necessarily being their friend, but you also have that at your disposal. You speak with, grace and shit when you're trying to, grow as a person. You're trying to, like, improve yourself, grow, you know, socially, or, you know, in, like, business ventures and shit like that. You have that kind of lucky side where, it comes to you because you, like, attracted like that. You use your grace and in your calm words, well, so people know that, you're listening to them, and you can also, keep that good communication between them, and that's where that comes, and that's your blessing, right? So Scorpio, Jupiter in the fourth house. Shit might have been a little chaotic at home, right? But you use that, right? The little toxic moments you had with your parents, your mom was still there for you. You still value your mom and shit. You still care about her. But you're also like, I have to do things for myself. I have to do things so I can, make my mama proud, and, like, really make her proud. And if anything happened to my mama, I'm on the, I'm hunting people down. I'm getting, like, revenge. You're that kind of guy. You're definitely on some shit like that. You know, you or even female too. You do some shit like that if you had a good relationship with your mother. And you still have that about you where you try to seek, what you desire in life, whatever you deeply desire in life. You're always looking for that, and you know how to go about doing it too. You know how to get your point across. You're very intense, so people sense that, and they're like, God damn, this person probably means what they fucking talking about. And you also ain't always, looking for everybody. Again, you seek these people who are more, your kind of friend, that you can trust. Your mother probably told you shit like that too. Do not trust, just anybody. You shouldn't just trust anybody you meet. You should really, like, size people up, see how they're, like, treating other people, and all that shit, right? You kind of have to, know how to navigate that shit, you know. And when you do things, you do it with an intensity. And people love that about you, whether you realize it or not, which you probably do. But they understand that you do things, and you do it, like, to the best of your ability, especially if you, like, really, really desire to do it. You ain't gonna let nothing fucking slow you down, boy or girl. You ain't gonna let nobody fucking stop you. That fearless kind of attitude, you know, towards, attaining the things you want in life. That's, you reap those rewards, you know. You don't care about stepping on other people's feelings that much, you know. But as you, mature, you might, slow down a little more, but you never really slow down. You just, you transform, and you transform into a person that you want to become through all the experiences you had in life, good or bad, right? And you become, somebody. You definitely, like, by the time your life is, like, said and done, you have done a lot of things, and you never, like, shied away from, you know doing the damn thing, you know and, like, nobody has to fucking know everything you did, but you know what you did. You know what your guts are made of. That kind of thing. So then, when it comes to the next sign, Sagittarius, Jupiter in the fourth house. That's a great placement to have as well. Sagittarius, Jupiter in the fourth house might have came with a little bit of, trouble within the household, as you were one who always liked to, do things when you felt like doing it, or, you felt the need to do it. You were sure about it. You were like, I gotta do this now. I don't give a fuck. I'll go sneak out and go to parties, and do all this shit. I'll talk to these people and say what I fucking need to say. I know my mom or daddy might have said, use respect, when you're talking to certain people, but, you weren't gonna let that slow you down. Sometimes when you felt like the need to, and you, like, were trying to, like, experience something new, you're gonna be like, damn, I need to do this. I need to say what I need to say. I need to do what I need to do. I don't care. So you probably got the belt a lot. So you might not have liked, home that much. But you found friends that really liked what you were about. they're like, oh, they appreciated your honesty. They appreciated the, um, your charm that you have, that charismatic charm you have, right? You were able to then, get into like all kind of things, businesses, and, like whatever kind of business you want, whatever kind of friendships you wanted, whatever kind of, flings you wanted to have, whatever places you wanted to see, that kind of shit. Like nothing ever slowed you down. You don't even give a fuck if you like don't even have, you know, you would make the most of what you can. If you feel like doing it, you're gonna do it. No mommy there to like slow me down or any of that. And it ain't that you don't appreciate her for what she did to you. She brought you into this life. You appreciate that kind of shit. That's why you swing back around for her every once in a while, and you're just joking, fooling around. You're trying to bring her spirits up. You're like always that person who tried to do that, right? Bring other people's spirits up. You have a positive outlook on life. You'll always see that. Even when other people don't quite see them, and you see them, and you just do it. And you're fuck what people think, and that's why people like you, and that's why people follow you, and like come into your life, and great money and all that. Great money, great relationships can come from this placement. And yeah, you got the like stern talking to and all that shit, but you still appreciate that, because even a little bit of that comes off in those relationships that are like meaningful to you. You care about your friends, is what I'm saying. Other people, they're there, and you ain't gonna shy away from telling them what it is or whatever, but your buddies and shit, you make sure you got them. You try to, and you got that, generous. So like when I have something, I want my people to have it too. Your family, it goes back to your mama and shit, right? Next is Capricorn, Jupiter in the fourth house. So Capricorn, Jupiter in the fourth house, right? Capricorn, Jupiter in the fourth house. We have Capricorn, Jupiter in the fourth house. We have, oh my God, we have a guy or girl really, respected their parents and respected the ground rules they set. Moving forward, they had a, determination. They had ambition. So like they would, they wanted something, they were gonna make sure they did it themselves, right? That kind of thing. I have that in me to do it myself. I don't need help from anybody. I'll learn. I'll take mentorships. I'll do all that, and I'll grind, and I'll work hard, and I'll stay disciplined. Um, you know, my mom will reap the benefits too. I don't really care about other things. I'm making sure I find those specific people who will help me grow in that kind of way. So like my status, my career, that kind of thing. Because Capricorn's really about that shit. I'll learn from these people. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll make sure I outwork everybody at the workplace and make sure that I am a guy that, man, people can confide in, but like don't bring me that like nonsense, because I don't fucking like it. That's how the earth signs be. You know, and it's like when you're trying to grow and expand for yourself. So you're like, okay, when you locked in and you're trying to find that career, you finally come to the point in your life where you're trying to find that career, you're trying to like learn things and other things. You're really like locked, like you're on that grind time shit. You're like not really, fucking with anybody else. You don't really give a fuck what other people have to say, and you're just doing your thing. Making progress too. But it might be downtimes you don't give a fuck. It's like I'm seeing it materialize in front of me, slowly but surely. And when you get to those points in your life where you have a lot, you give back to your mama. Even if whatever, you just don't want your mama to be down bad. You don't want her to be fucked up. You gotta make sure she's all right. because you understand the importance of your mother, bringing you into this fucking world, man. So, and ladies too, you know. But the next person, you know, has Jupiter in Aquarius. So Jupiter in Aquarius, you are a person, right, who sees opportunities too. You like to, talk about, what's on your mind with people. You know, maybe not just anybody, but people who are down to, talk to you. But you also, like to just, talk to people who might not want you talking to them. You know, just somebody who would listen to, whatever's on your mind, whatever ideas you have, right? This is a good thing to have, the communication skills specifically. And then the whole, you are one who is, you think, a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is you listen to what other people say, right? And you still question things. You kind of, people call it a rebellious energy you have, right? You have an unpredictability factor about you, right? This unpredictability factor can be a good thing or a bad thing, and it's depending on how you use your mouth and talk to people. You know, in your family, you might have been somebody who was, good at talking, communicating, but you also have that sense of, I need to get out of the house. Just like these fire signs. I need to experience life. I need to learn from these books, talk to these people, and I want to like build whatever my life around these type of individuals. I want to network with these type of individuals. I want to do that. You know, you let your parents know shit. A little bit. Whether they agree with you or not, whatever. Your mom. You know, you had that great communication with your mom and stuff. You know, your mom knew probably that you were gonna then, find the right friends. Because she, also got on your ass about no, not hanging out with these people. If you're trying to do this kind of thing, if you're trying to do this kind of thing, why are you gonna hang out with these kind of people? And things happen there. You learned how to navigate that shit yourself when you got into adulthood. You might have your friends for this and your friends for that, but you have your friends that strong network group, and you find that too. That you like know, I can count on them for this. We can grow our business together. We can be partners on, this kind of thing. We can investment partners, all kind of shit. Anything. It can also be a little chaotic because you have an unpredictableness with you. So luck can be fluctuating with you. Abundance mindset. As long as you don't overthink situations, that's there for sure. Because you have that avenue of communicating with people, talking to people who are like-minded. By talking to anybody if they're even going to be that. But you have to talk to them first, right? And once you talk to them and figure out what's on their mind, okay, this person's like me. They think kind of like me. Let's see where this relationship can go. That type of deal. If they're not, you might keep them around as a friend or whatever, acquaintance, and just be, whatever. You know, true humanitarian type shit. People like that's that kind of thing. Um, when you're actually trying to be about something and not just yourself, but grow as a person and obtain the things you want in this life. Now, the next placement is in the last one, Pisces, Jupiter in the fourth house. So Pisces, Jupiter in the fourth house. This person, they got a good placement, right? So these people know how to, sweet talk their parents. They know how to, get what they want out of people. They have that good intuition, right? When they're doing things, right? When they're trying to attract abundance in life, it just comes to them. It flows to them like a river. You know, they talk how they need to talk to the right people. If they have to get loud a little bit, they get loud a little bit. They have to, subtly, egg people on or get people to see what they're trying to, have them feel or basically move them through that emotionally, right? Because when you start doing shit like that and you're trying to expand, grow, you know, obtain, what you want in life, you know, have friends, have, your friend groups and stuff. You try to like move them in with their feelings and shit, right? Their emotional state. You try to like come in and be like almost like you were there at the right time, right place, that kind of thing. You have that level of mystique about you when you're doing things like that. And it's a good thing because guess what? You come in like that at the right time and other things like, damn, and it hits those people that you approach and, come in contact with. And they're like, damn, they remember you and shit too. They're like, this person, without this person, we wouldn't have been able to, make our money. We wouldn't have been able to do this, do that. It's because your mother told you also, you gotta care about, people's feelings and their emotional state. You gotta like not fuck with them in a negative way so much. You gotta be a little positive about it. Positive. Maybe acknowledge that bad stuff, but then like be creative in how you like fucking say shit. Make their day better type thing. Be the one to like come in and be like a hero, savior. Small things, small positive actions can actually, change people's lives and shit. And this kind of shit. And you use it to your advantage. And you should, and money comes through this and um, you know, a stable household, comes through that too. You know, you really care about, everybody's emotional state. You try to like not, step on eggshells too much. If you do have to, you still, weren't trying to do it, but you knew at which moments you had to, and you do, it comes with that kind of wisdom. That's another like sign of wisdom, right? Pisces and Jupiter, you have that about you. You're not afraid to go out and set out on your own, and you eventually attract those people who like you. They'll stick around and they just like being around you. So that is Jupiter in the fourth house is taught by, Darius the Green Angel. I'll be back next week with Saturn in the fourth house. But be cool, calm the corner, and I might make another video tonight. I'm in LA, by the way.